All right. Our fourth von Neumann lecture on computer science will be presented by Professor Leslie Valiant, and Professor Eli Upfall will introduce the speaker.
Hi, it's a great pleasure to introduce Professor Les Valiant from Harvard. I think Professor Valiant is by far one of the most influential researcher and scholar in theoretical computer science. He's a recipient of the Turing Award, the highest award in computer science. He's a member of the Royal Society and the National Academy of the Sciences, and these are only a few of the honors and prizes that he has received. More importantly, I should say that I think Professor Valiant contributed significantly to basically almost any area or any important question in computer science in the last 30, 40 years, starting with automata theory that some of the young people here don't even know. He then turned to complexity of algebraic computation, which led to the study of the gap between the permanent and the determinant. And for those of you who don't know, the permanent is the determinant without the signs, and the permanent happened to encode or count the number of perfect matchings. And this led to another breakthrough of Professor Valiant when he defined the class Char P, which is a enumeration complexity. It's a complexity class of enumeration, which we still quote often in our classes when we explain why we do approximate counting instead of precise counting. Then Professor Valiant published one of the pioneering paper in probabilistic analysis of algorithm, and I have to mention that paper. This is one of the first papers I read as a student, very influential, the first analysis on GNP graphs of algorithms. He then turned to what was, again, the main area of that time, parallel and distributed computing. Came up with very elegant routing algorithms, and then a very influential model for parallel computation, the BSP model. Professor Valiant was always interested in computational neuroscience, and published a beautiful book, Circuit of the Mind, which we highly recommend. And I think for many of the younger people, he's mostly associated with PAC learning, or his name is mostly associated with PAC learning, which is a model, is a way to model and mathematically study this very important area of machine learning. And in recent years, Professor Valiant pushed it to one step forward, where he is trying to use the formalization of learning in order to study the evolution, the natural evolution, and kind of phrasing evolution as a long-term learning problem. And I believe that, we don't have the title of the talk, but that's was going to be the subject of the talk, I believe. So, yeah. So please join me in welcoming Professor Valiant.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you very, very much for this invitation to this wonderful conference. I always like going to conferences which are so broad. And thanks also for the invitation to Brown. So I think I first came here, I think it was 41 years ago, and there's even some intersection in the audience. So I'm very glad to see that the audience has changed a little, but not completely. So what I'm really going to talk about is learning and evolution. So the center, there's one focus, which is a connection which can be easily made in terms of computer science, but is otherwise not so evident. So there are two views of this main thing I'll present. So one view is that in terms of computer science, it's like a little truism. On the other hand, it may have some substance because the result annoys quite a few people. So depending on how you count, we'll see. So I also took seriously the invitation to talk about the 500th anniversary of founding of Brown. So, so I don't have anything very creative to say, but I'll just mention that there is one question which academics didn't think of, but once I went into high school, and there's one question on top of everyone's mind, and you hear it all the time in popular speculations, is, so if one talks about AI, are super intelligent robots going to exceed our intelligence in 10 years' time and treat us as badly as we treat other things on the planet? Okay, so this is seems a valid question which academics don't take very seriously, maybe for good reason, but at least just like the people on the Manhattan Project, I gather, spent at least a little effort figuring out whether there was a 1% chance that the planet would go up in a puff of smoke because of their experiment, which would maybe spend a little effort into wondering whether this similar calamity will come about. So we'll come back to it at the end of the talk, but the relevance is that this is clearly to do with evolution, learning, and intelligence, and one can see what kind of science one can build up of these things, which may shed light on this speculative question. Okay, so very briefly, what are we talking about? Learning and evolution. In the human world, learning is a spectacular phenomenon, and one aspect is that children are estimated to learn at the rate of about 10 words a day, which is very impressive because if we try to learn a foreign language, that seems impressive. But of course, what children are doing is far more impressive than that, because they don't just learn these 10 new words, they learn how to use them at the rate of 10 a day. And this is truly astounding because they generalize correctly. After a small amount of experience, they know how to use these 10 concepts well. And what generalization is has been a subject of philosophical speculation for thousands of years as induction, but in some sense that's become non-mysterious because really it's what machine learning does. So the fact that we've got these machine learning products in our pockets makes us wonder less about this phenomenon, but treat it more as a tangible scientific phenomenon. So learning happens in the natural world. It's an incredibly impressive phenomenon. Well, the other observation is that what we learn is incredible, but what makes up the rest of us? Well, surely if you believe in mechanistic explanations, then every other aspect of who we are must have been acquired by the process of evolution. So what you haven't learned in your lifetime, you must have acquired through evolution. There's nothing else. So, so learning and evolution are somehow an all-encompassing way of defining who we are. So maybe if we understand learning and evolution, we'll understand all these things which people have wondered about for centuries, the most sort of intimate puzzles about being human. So somehow very suddenly we're having this rather grandiose program. We're trying to understand these imponderable phenomena of life as phenomena of computation. So how did we get this far this fast? So if you were at Christos' talk the last hour, you're not surprised because he already got us here. And in fact, there will be quite many points of overlap between my talk and his, both in philosophy and in substance, so I'll try to refer to any differences. But also, as he pointed out, who we should blame for this is nothing other than these two gentlemen, because besides discovering the notion of universal computation and making this a reality, achievements which have changed the world, another aspect of what these two people did, which probably should rate in history equally highly, is to understand that these developments had much broader consequences. And the manifestation of this is that these people did incredible things. So besides inventing computer science and in fact working in many aspects of computer science which exist today in computer science departments, they went off in a totally different direction. And look, Turing had a paper on intelligence and computing, published in a journal of psychology and philosophy. And then he also want to understand the chemical basis of regular patterns in biology. And as we know, von Neumann was interested in how the brain worked, and is also interested in genetics. So it's rather extraordinary that suddenly these two people started exploring subjects for which there wasn't any kind of mathematical basis beforehand. And maybe it's a coincidence, but maybe not, that they happen to be the same two people who happen to lay the groundwork for computer science. So in some sense, they set the direction for this very grandiose view of computing, where you want to get explanations of almost everything in terms of computing, especially phenomena to do with biology and things like that. Okay. So, but they didn't do everything. So they did leave some stuff for us to do. And the question is, what's an opportunity for us in our generation to push forward this program? Okay, so we do really believe that computation is a very important way of understanding such phenomena of the mind and of biology, but we have to do something. And so the approach which I have taken, and many others, is the same as physics, which is that there are some quantitative laws which govern what we're discussing. In this case, not physics, but computation. And if we understand these quantitative laws, then it will help us to understand the natural phenomena which we find. And this study is in general called computational complexity, the study of quantitative resources for computation. And it's also interesting in the sense that it's a theory which is not a theory which any one person has invented. Even a generation or two isn't quite enough to finish it off. And so in fact, many, as Christos pointed out, many questions are still open. So it seems to be a grand program of research which we're in the middle of and may take many generations. Okay, so the area in which complexity, the question of complexity have appeared already a long time ago, and which is, I think, the most natural thing to start with, although it has come very late, is biological evolution. So what's Darwin's theory of evolution? Well, this is a diagram he drew early in his researches about how we're all related, you, me, the monkey, and maybe the celery also. And then he proposed a mechanism for which you progress down this tree. And then immediately the question arises, and it arose in his mind, about how long it takes. And is it plausible that this actually happened? Because so at this time there was certainly a context. So so one person who he read at university is William Paley, who is now regarded as one of the great kind of writers on creationism, of course. And he wrote phrases like, so he argued it's a question of whether living things are related or not, and change what had been debated for a long time. So he argued for the creationist position, and one sentence says that that what you find in nature surpassing complexity and subtlety and curiosity of the mechanism as compared to what artificial things are. So nature is even more amazing what people can make. So it would be amazing if things in nature weren't designed. And as is well known, so Darwin studied this and he believed the argument. And okay, this is what he writes. I did not at that time trouble myself about Paley's premises, and taking these on trust, I was charmed and convinced of the long line of argumentation. So he was sold on this, and it's only when he traveled around the world later on and saw lots of animals that he changed his mind and created the theory he did. But the first kind of scientific resistance to his theory was in fact one of complexity, and a big debate in the late 19th century was the age of the Earth. So this is kind of widely recited history. So in the first edition of the Origin of Species, Darwin just made a comment that one geological formation in England was at least 300 million years old. And he put this in because he was worried about this, and so he had some argument, that geological argument, that this is old, so the Earth must be at least that much old. And he needed time, enough time to make it possible in his own mind that evolution would work. But this is what the scientists of the time jumped on, and Kelvin, the foremost physicist of the day, he published several papers on his estimate of the age of the Earth, and these estimates kept coming down. Okay, so his final paper said 24 million years. And this is pretty bad, and Darwin worried about this, and he removed this estimate from his book, in fact, from later editions, because he couldn't reconcile it. He respected the physicists. So what's happened since? Well, the physicists have improved their estimate. That's good news. But the bad news is that it's not clear whether this is enough, because well, what is evolution? Okay, so if evolution is some sort of search, then a search in its most basic form is some sort of exponential process. So if you're looking for a gene, maybe the human gene, and it takes 1 billion bits to specify. And if evolution is that you keep looking for strings until you find one that says human success, then that would take this many years, which is rather long. Well, okay, so no one says this was a process, but if this wasn't the process, then what was? So we have to suggest a mechanism which is which fits into the time period. And in computer science terms, the question is, how can a complex circuit, so I'll talk about this later, so we are very complex protein circuits, which takes many bits to specify, and we want to a process which evolves these things to a very voluminous and take many bits to specify in time which is less than exponential in how long it takes to specify, because exponentially in billions is not realistic. Okay, and so one reason why Darwin didn't quite solve this is because he didn't actually tell us exactly what evolution is. He only gave an informal suggestion. So, for example, when people talk about random mutations, what exactly do they mean? So, so one possible theory is that evolution happens with some uniform randomness. So each base pair changes with fixed probability uniformly across the genome. So that's one possible mechanism. But if that happens, we have to explain why that works. Okay, so if you have an algorithm, you have to explain why it succeeds. What does it achieve? And we have no explanation of what it achieves.
Why is it 20?
Sorry? Well, it's 20 amino acids, and it's about 1 billion groups of 3. Genome is about 3 billion long, so 1 billion groups of 3, and there's 20 options for each. It doesn't matter the details, but okay. So it's a big number, yes. So of course there are many possible randomized processes, and we don't quite know which one biology uses, and Darwin didn't tell us. And in some sense, that's the program of research. At the end of the day, we want to understand what exactly is the random process which makes it work, and why it works. And the fact that our current knowledge isn't satisfactory can be explained by the fact that computer simulations aren't too convincing. So there are many reasons to believe in evolution, but computer simulations, I think, are the weakest ones. It's very hard to find computer simulations of evolutionary processes which say, oh yes, this is very lifelike. I can just now I see how life evolved. They just don't work. Okay. So put it another way, why we're discussing evolution and what the dispute is here is that so clearly the evidence for Darwin's theory is overwhelming, both from a fossil record and DNA. So he had a theory and all the vast amount of evidence discovered afterwards, which is consistent with it. But what I'm discussing here is that our standards of what an explanation is have also gone up. We want more than did the Victorians as an explanation. And I give 2 here, both to do with computing. So one is that, of course, the point of his theory is that it's proposed as a mechanism for evolution. And now we know what a mechanism is. Turing told us what a mechanism is. So that's one thing. We have high standards of, we want to define exactly what a mechanism is. But the other thing is that we do want to confirm that this mechanism does what we claim it does, either by analysis or by computer simulation. So, every other important scientific theory we can simulate on a computer and get results which are consistent, and somehow evolution seems to be a kind of a strange thing. Okay, and in other words, Kuth says science is what we can explain to a computer, so we want to put evolution in concrete enough terms that you can simulate it on a computer and it does what you claim. Okay, but so these are kind of two problems, but of course there's also a big opportunity that now we know biologists have told us exactly where evolution happens. So this mystery is totally made explicit, and this is what we'll exploit. So we know that we're basically a protein machine, about 20,000 proteins, and we've got a gene expressing each protein, and furthermore, so we've got this 20,000 proteins, 20,000 genes, each express a protein, but whether and how much a gene will express the protein depends on the conditions in the cell it lives in. And typically, it'll say this, your seventh gene will express this protein according to some level, quantity, which depends on what other proteins are swimming around in the cell and also other chemicals. So, okay, so these expression functions, so it's just the amount of protein which a cell expresses in terms of what's in the cell, in terms of the proteins which are around, which have been expressed by other genes, is the center of biology. Okay, everything centers on this, and evolution happens by changing your genome. So when you evolve, then these functions change. And these are the only things which change. Okay, so the proteins may change, but if the proteins are stationary, then the conditions under which they're expressed change. The symmetry between the two. So this is all we have to understand. And so the genome acts. It's not just a bit string. It actually it produces proteins. It's its function. So you can think of a gene as a function which actually outputs some things. Okay, so in saying the same thing, so we know that we've got a protein description on your DNA, and associated with it some specification of the conditions under which you'll express it. And okay, so this is a slightly different number. Okay, so we've got lots of proteins. So the question is, so as we evolve, these E's and the P's change. And so the question is, how do they change? So Darwin gave a mechanism. Darwin said there was a mechanism by which, by natural selection, these change and somehow improve. Okay, so this is the mystery. And of course, the assumption is that that some behaviors are good for us and some behaviors are bad for us. That's the whole point of fitness in Darwin's sense. And the genomes act, they express stuff, and either they express what they do may be good for you or bad for you, and you want to evolve so that you improve. Okay, so, okay.
Wait, question, I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand. How many bits did you assign to E7?
Okay, so please, so I didn't, okay, so this is just, no, I'm saying you've got 20,000 of these. The estimate of the bits, please forget, that's just the estimate of the whole genome. Okay, so it's a bit, let's forget about the bits now. Yeah, well, there may be, your genome may have some other stuff as well, but okay, besides this. Okay, but the important thing is that we've got 20,000 of these functions, each potentially dependent on 20,000 variables. Okay, okay, so Okay, and just repeating, so we want a mechanism for evolving this, which is not exponential but polynomial. Okay, so this is what we come to. So what we come to is that your seventh protein will be expressed according to some formula. It does something. Maybe it's only dependent on two proteins, the first and the second, and maybe this is the formula which tells you how much it's going to express. It's some function. We don't know what it is. It's some function. Okay. So the question is, we've got 20,000 of these, and that's what we are. And Darwin tells us that the system of 20,000 of these functions all evolved by natural selection. Okay, so that's all we have to understand, and no designer. Okay, so the question is how is this possible? And so this is what we study. Can they do so under a Darwinian process? Okay, so it's a very simple question. And so as I phrased it, okay, so if we want to study how complex functions arise without a designer, where do we look? Well, we go to a course on machine learning. Okay, so machine learning is the area that studies how complex mechanisms arise from experience rather than through someone having designed them. So since everyone goes to machine learning courses, in case there are one or two people who haven't been to one, I'll tell you what machine learning is in 3 slides. Okay, so in machine learning, there's a function f, which you have to find what the function is, and it may translate French to English, or it may convert sound to text, or maybe distinguishes flower species A from flower species B. And the point is that you acquire the knowledge without being the f. You have to find a program for f without someone programming it. The information comes from experience, like from examples. Okay, so this is machine learning, and so okay. So if you want my personal, okay, I haven't mentioned the word big data yet, so I should use the word big data. Okay, so okay, so my impression of big data is this. Okay, it's an artist impression. Okay, big data. So the idea is that the world is very complicated, and what we're dealing with are entities which learn and evolve, and these are very small and modest. They're so small you can't even see it. Okay, that dot is the evolving agent. And the idea is that you look at the evolving agent is very weak. The world is infinitely complicated. We've got no hope of describing it. But somehow this very limited agent with very limited resources can somehow cope. So that's basically the view of machine learning, that you study very simple algorithms which somehow do capture some aspects of reality. Okay. So what's a learning algorithm? So in a learning algorithm, let's do an algorithm for distinguishing two species of flowers, A and B. So you have so the examples, maybe you measure 3 dimensions of flowers, maybe the length, width, and depth in some units, x, y, and z. And you say that the first one, which is length 1, width 1, and depth 2, is species A, and the second one of length 1, width 1, and depth 1 is species B. This is input to your learning algorithm. What you want to do in the future, of course, is to be able to predict for future examples which species it is. So archetypal algorithm due to Frank Rosenblatt, 1958. So the assumption made is that we assume that there's a linear inequality which holds for the data, and if 3 times the first dimension plus 4 times the second dimension minus 7 times the third dimension is greater than 0, it's species A, and otherwise it's species B. So we assume there's such a relationship, but of course we don't know what it is, and from data we want to find the 3, 4, and the 7, with which we can predict future examples. Okay, so So the algorithm is algorithm which is very simple, and for those of you who haven't seen it, so the algorithm says, look at an example. Suppose this is your current hypothesis. You plug it in, you put 1 for x, 1 for y, and 2 for z, and you find that 3 plus 4 minus 14 is negative. So your current hypothesis would in fact say that this is species B, this is species A, so your hypothesis is wrong, so you have to change it. And the algorithm, all it does is it just adds the coefficients, 1, 1, and 2, to the coefficients here to get the new hypothesis. Okay. If it's wrong in the other direction, it subtracts. If it's correct, it doesn't change. It's just a very, very, very simple algorithm.
Is there any significance to the fact that the change in the coefficient of z is larger?
Well, that was because of the 2, you mean? Okay, so so the algorithm just blindly adds and subtracts these coefficients. Okay, it does nothing if the hypothesis is correct, and it either adds or subtracts depending on which way it's wrong. Okay, and so so this algorithm has some convergence properties. It's very useful. It's good, and we'll discuss in a second what that means. But already, what I want to draw is the analogy with evolution. I'll try to put evolution in the straitjacket of learning. And the first very vague suggestion I'd like you to think about is that the point of this learning algorithm, if you observe it, looks pretty stupid. That if you just look at one act, you see a flower, it adds a few numbers, then it subtracts a few numbers. So each act looks pretty arbitrary, not too smart. But somehow the algorithm has a plan. For some reason, if you make these little changes, it'll converge. If you made some other little changes, if you subtracted and added the opposite direction, it wouldn't do anything. Okay, so these small changes look random, stupid, arbitrary, but there's an overall algorithmic plan, so if you do many of it, it'll really converge. So the suggestion is that maybe evolution we should think of in a similar way, that lots of little changes. We have to think, there's an algorithmic kind of, so if I talk about machine learning, talking about the algorithmic plan, it seems sensible, but in evolution, you can't talk about an algorithmic plan, but okay, okay, so briefly, so we want to get to what evolution is, but what is learning? So this is the PAC notion of learning is. So the question is, when should we declare a learning algorithm to be successful? So this notion just writes down, in simple terms, some very basic requirements. And they're often met in practice, so that's why it works. So the idea is that the blue circle are all possible flowers in the universe, at least of these 2 types. Some are of type A, some are of type B. So ones above the diagonal are positive, species A, below species B. And so after learning, you get a hypothesis, and inevitably it may be wrong sometimes. So the hypothesis and the error and the true ones may be wrong. So PAC learning has 3 conditions. So clearly you want the error to be small by the time you're finished. You don't want a big error. So a second point is that you want to make minimal assumptions on the world. As I said, it's big data, complex. Who knows what it is? So the probability with which various points come in the blue circle should be arbitrary. No assumptions. But on the other hand, when you test it, you only test it on the same distribution on which you train it. So if there's some very rare cases which you haven't seen, doesn't matter, you'll never see it in the future. Okay? So it makes very few assumptions. And then the main part is that you want to be honest that the amount of computation this process takes of finding hypothesis should be feasible. So it should be polynomial in the relevant parameters. And the other thing you want to be feasible, to be controllable, is the errors. So as I said, errors are inevitable, but what you want is to be able to drive the errors down arbitrarily small, and also the price you pay for it is also controllable. So if you want 1% error or 0.1% error, you should be able to do both. Question is how much effort should be required. And here it says the effort should be polynomial, maybe quadratic, say, in the inverse of the error. So to get error 1%, maybe you're willing to go to 10,000, proportional 10,000 effort. For inverse 10th of a percent, you may have to go to a million. Okay, so it's polynomial in the inverse error, so you want to control those. Okay, so this is a specification of when you can declare a machine learning algorithm to work. The errors are small and computation is feasible. Okay, so that sounds reasonable. Okay. Okay, so in that sense and in various other senses, this algorithm converges. So next question is maybe evolution is exactly this. Maybe this is this is what evolution is. So why isn't it obvious that evolution is a kind of machine learning? So I think that there are two gaps. So one observation is that in some sense this is already more powerful than what Darwin allows us. Because in machine learning, okay, so maybe, sorry, I should, okay, right, okay, so I should put this down. So the correspondence I want to make between machine learning and evolution is the following. So the hypothesis will correspond to the genome. The examples will be your experiences. So the learning algorithm will be the mechanism of variation, which is what Darwin talked about, is how the next generation differs from this generation. That's what the learning algorithm is. And the feedback from the environment, well, in this kind of supervised learning, someone tells you species A, species B, and what's the feedback in evolution? Well, Darwin tells us it's survival. Okay, so the okay, so this is the correspondence I want to make. Okay, so okay, so your genome is a hypothesis. You go through various experiences, and then corresponding to a perceptron update algorithm will correspond to a mutation in biological evolution. Okay, and maybe that could be uniform. So it's some randomized process which we don't understand. That's what we're trying to find out. And then the feedback, whether that was a good mutation, is just that some die and some don't. Okay, so that's the correspondence. Okay, but even then, there's still two gaps which people should worry about. Okay, so one is that in some sense this is already, maybe you think this is too weak. How can this do magic things? But it's already, in one sense, it's already too strong for Darwinian evolution. And the sense in which it's too strong is that in a machine learning algorithm, you have a hypothesis. You see one example, you can change your hypothesis. Okay, but in evolution, no one thinks that's true. So if we have a genome and we have some experience, we can't change our genome. Okay, okay. So Darwin says that our way of changing our hypothesis is very limited. All we can do is we have a genome. We can prepare variant genomes for the next generation, and some will succeed and some will not. So experiences don't affect the next generation, the choice of the variation, but the real world only puts in feedback by testing these next generation on how good it is. Okay, so Darwinian evolution is a very clean model of a restricted model of machine learning. Okay, so one can define a Darwinian notion of machine learning. So, okay, so is that okay? So okay, so you could say that standard machine learning is very Lamarckian. Okay, from a single experience, if the fruit is high up in the tree, you just stretch your neck. Okay, so that kind of thing. Okay, so but Darwin said that's not allowed. Okay, so I won't be technical here, but just like one can make up a model of machine learning, one can make up a model of evolution, and there are two main parts. The first part I've already kind of covered, which is that it's a restricted kind of machine learning where you make variants of your current genome independent of experience, and then the variants are tested in the real world about how effective they are, how fit they are. Okay, so you can restrict your machine learning to algorithms like this. Okay, so saying that evolution is a restricted kind of machine learning is totally harmless statement in this way. So the other issue, which is one people have most trouble with, is what's the goal of evolution? Okay, so in machine learning, in supervised machine learning, someone tells you flower A, flower B. So what goes on in evolution? And so I think the answer to that is also totally innocuous, and Darwin told us what the answer is. So the answer is that some behaviors are better for us than others, and our goal is to improve our behavior. Okay, so fitness, in the sense used in the 1860s, is some attribute by which your behavior is somehow beneficial to you. You're fit. So the goal of evolution is to behave in a way which is better for you. Okay. So to make this a bit more mathematical, so one defines an ideal function, and that's maybe unfortunate choice of terms, but basically what it says is that so in every situation, so maybe for every combination of chemical concentrations in a cell, there may be a best amount of protein to express. Okay, similarly with human action. So there may be a best number of glasses of wine to drink a day. It may be 0, it may be 1, it may be 10. So we don't know, but you know, we've got choice of behaviors, and some behaviors will lead to prosperity and others won't. Okay, and so so there's a notion of ideal behavior. So some things are better for you than others. So Darwin clearly implied that, and so this so for all infinite number of different situations, this how good this behavior is for our species at this instant in this environment is kind of defined. Up in the sky, it's some abstract infinite description. No one knows it, we don't have to know it. But the point is that our behavior, if we're close to that behavior, we'll do better than someone who's further from that behavior. We just do the beneficial things more often. So if we drink the right number of glasses of wine a day, we'll do better. Okay. Okay. So so then the performance of a genome is some measure of how close it is to best behavior. Okay, and that basically corresponds to someone telling you yes or no, species A or species B. Okay, so these are the two areas where you have to interpret to put evolution into this machine learning straitjacket. Otherwise, the main point is the obvious things one do as a computer scientist. So how do you produce variance for the next generation? Well, I want to be very open-minded. I'll allow any feasible computational process. So you've got your genome. Biology may randomly make a mutation uniformly. That's one process. Sometimes biology just copies a bit of gene somewhere else. That's another process. Turing machines can do this. I'll allow you to do anything which is computationally feasible. And the reason being that it's very hard to think of anything which helps. Okay, it's very hard to do evolution. And we are trying to discover new mechanisms for evolution which people haven't thought of. So we want to encourage broad thinking about possible evolutionary mechanisms and why they work. And it's not that, even if you allow everything, it's hard to think of. Evolution is difficult. Okay, and then last thing says we're honest. So the population sizes, numbers of generations, the number of experiences per individual all have to be limited. Okay, nothing is infinite, nothing is exponential. So this corresponds to what we think of in machine learning models. You want to converge, or you want to make progress, you want to improve with a limited number of experiences, limited number of generations, limited population sizes. Okay, so if you didn't have the fourth requirement, then everything is a waste of time, because in some infinite limit you can do anything of this kind. Okay, so so this is what this is. Biologist's dilemma. So this is a plot. So this is protein E7. Supposing the expression of protein E7 depends on just one protein, that's 2315, and as the concentration of this increases in the cell, the amount you'll express will be that curve. Okay, so each gene has some behavior of how much it expresses. Okay, and okay, and maybe, so these are two options. And so what's the dilemma? So the dilemma is that if you, so of course the problem is that you've got 20,000 of these, and each graph isn't just one-dimensional, but it depends on many proteins. So typically, typically 10. So you've got 20,000 of these funny things, and between them they describe what we do, and between them they evolve. Okay, so this set of 20,000 things somehow changes to become better or whatever. So how on earth is this possible? And the dilemma is that if you, should you make these functions, squiggly lines, complicated or simple? And the problem is that if you make them complicated, then there will probably be no evolutionary algorithm. So if you have a theory of what these functions are, then along with your theory of what these functions are should be a theory of how there's an evolutionary algorithm to maintain it. Okay, so climate changes, we change, these curves change, and we have to explain how it's done. And of course, if these functions are too simple, then there's probably no biology, because we probably are quite complicated. And so this is the same dilemma, for example, as in machine learning, that many things are not learnable, and you have to play a very fine line between what's learnable and what's not.
Drawing those curves, are they arbitrary?
They're arbitrary, yeah. So just my bad drawing, yes. Yes. Yes, but in biology journals, as you know, you can find some curves, some variety. Yes. Okay, so just to press home the computational aspect here, and that there are many dimensions. So on the left, so each line on the left, the 0, 1, 1, 1, they're the concentrations of these various so each column is a protein, and so each line is a condition. So, and 0 and 1 means just whether the, it's a 0, 1 Boolean case where whether the protein is in your cell. Okay. And supposing under the first condition, you should express your protein, your current protein. And the second condition, you should also. But on the third and fourth condition, you should not. Okay. So, so this is very generic. It just says that, under some conditions you should, and under some conditions you shouldn't. So this particular example I made up by saying that look at the blue columns, and if I have an odd number of ones in these three columns, I should express. If I've got an even number of ones, I should not. Okay. So here, if the parity of those variables is odd, you should do one thing. Otherwise, you should not. Okay. So this may be a strange function. Okay, and in fact, you can prove that under very robust conditions, I think that discovering this by Darwinian learning algorithm would take exponential time. Okay. 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 So let's just say more. So these are two. You can get a series. I haven't defined my model very precisely, but I'm just illustrating a couple of results for Boolean functions. So the one kind of natural Boolean function is an odd number of these unknown variables true, and another one is at least one of those unknown set of variables true. And so results you can get are that for the uniform distribution. So the first one is doable. There's an evolutionary algorithm for doing disjunctions, but there isn't an evolutionary algorithm for doing parity. Okay. Of course, you could say that parity is a biologically strange function. Who's ever heard of it? But of course, that's a prediction. Okay. That, if you did find it in biology, that would be pretty strange. And just to emphasize. so clearly counting up the odd or even number of ones there, that's not difficult. I can do it. You can do it. What's at issue is that I give you lots of these strings, and kind of the good or bad for you depends on whether an odd or even number of some unknown set are true. So the set is unknown, and you somehow have to discover what the unknown set is on which this is important. And this is provably hard for Darwinian evolution. So this is something we can find out by analysis. So just to contrast with, so in ordinary machine learning, actually this problem is feasible. You can learn parity by ordinary machine learning if there's no noise by using linear algebra, but not if you have this Darwinian process by which you can't look at the data. You can't change your genome by looking at individual examples. Okay. And of course, this parity problem, as people know, with noise it apparently becomes difficult again, even for learning, and cryptographers use that. Okay, so so this was an example of how in an evolutionary model you can resolve what's easy and hard. So just to give a few more details, now I've moved to the real valued world, and just to give some idea of what the formulation would be. So there's this ideal function, this is ideal behavior, say for your gene. We don't know what it is. Your current one, H, does something slightly different. It doesn't behave like the best. You drink the wrong numbers of a glass of wine. So then this means that you could do better. You're somehow penalized, okay? And how much you're penalized, should be penalized is another problematic issue. So as with wine, so if you drink twice the optimal number of wine, we don't know how much to penalize you. Should we square the difference, cube it, multiply by 25, what? Okay, so what the loss function is another parameter, and it's very important for evolution algorithms to be very robust for it. So they work for ranges of them. The performance of your H is what your gene does, F is its best, and your performance is some aggregate measure of how well it behaves. So it's the loss averaged over all possible situations, and the situations are weighted so that the frequent ones are weighted heavily. So what you do in rare circumstances doesn't matter. So the main point here is that one is putting within a single theory the relevant things. So it seems that to define, so H is your current genome, that has to be in there somewhere. So whether your current genome is good or not, somehow, I don't see how you can discuss it without discussing kind of what's the best behavior is, that's F. So given that, we have a notion of fitness, which I call performance, which is some measure of how far you're away from best behavior. And then given all this, you can discuss algorithms, mechanisms for evolution. So it seems that you can't, all these elements seem to be essential if you're really going to discuss, if you have one particular mechanism for evolution, you can't miss any of these out. Okay. So now, so Christos talked about evolution, and so he talked about the Fisher-Wright model, which, as he said, it resolved some very important questions 100 years ago, which were very troubling at the time. But it's a purely statistical theory, and also, as Christos pointed out, that so fitness, I think, in the sense in which it was defined in the 19th century by, I think, Spencer and first and then Darwin, presumably meant fitness, you're fit if you do, depending on what you do, okay? So the statisticians redefined fitness into some sense, slightly circular, I think, okay? So they define fitness in how many children you're going to have, okay? So with notions of machine learning, one can kind of go more inside the gene and look at the actual behavior in the gene and what happens if you actually want to change genes. So the Fisher-Wright model was about genes which they come in varieties, alleles, but they don't change. Okay, so you don't look inside alleles, you've got fixed gene alleles, and you analyze how they compete. Okay, so here we're talking about alleles actually mutating and being different. Okay, so this computational view is that you actually look at the function which the gene computes, and then you define the performance, which I think is what the Victorians meant by fitness, but that word has been used, taken now. And then you can analyze algorithms, how they change the genes for the better. Okay, so computer science terms allows you to have a more detailed view of what goes on in evolution. So, okay, so 4 quick remarks, mainly for people who have strong views on evolution. So one general confusion is that the word evolution is really used very generally, as almost like the history of life on Earth. So people who study evolution study all kinds of strange details of it. And there are also broad themes like, game theoretic things, why sex, why peacocks. Darwin worried about that. But somehow, what I'm interested in here is somehow more lower level, how you can start off evolution at all to, okay, this says how evolution can achieve novel functionality as fast as it can. So how you can have a mechanism which, even how a complex mechanism can change to keep up with changing environments. Maybe not even improve, but just keep track of changes. Okay, so you've got a complex computation, which is what our protein circuits are, and somehow we managed to mutate them as conditions require and with limited resources. So that's what this is about. So there are all kinds of issues which, so some issues this approach doesn't address, there's some issues which it does. So issues of whether adaptive phenomena during life help in evolution go back to almost the time of Darwin. So in some sense, people have always recognized that evolution is difficult and there isn't a totally satisfactory explanation, and there are various ways they try to overcome it. So one is called the Baldwin effect, which says that somehow having plasticity during life and being able to learn speeds up evolutions without breaking the Darwinian rules. That's a good subject of research. So epigenetics, the idea that the information handed out to the next generation isn't just the DNA. There's also the epigenome. If you starve, then there's some impact on your grandchildren. And okay, so this is all true, but it's not clear whether any of this has decisive influence on overall evolution. So there are many effects which are not in the very narrow sense Darwinian as in my model, but it's not clear whether they have a big influence on biological evolution, and I think the preponderance of views among biologists is that they probably do not. But if they do, then I think this learning approach would be a way of investigating it. So that's my answer to all the questions. So if you have a good question, then I'm saying this is a good approach to study it with. Okay, so maybe this is the main point. So we know that there's a gene, there's the phenotype, your behavior, and what you look like. And then there's the environment. And this is all pretty complicated, and we've got no chance of describing it all. Yet evolution changes the genotype to be better in this environment. Okay, so how on earth are we so arrogant as to even dream of being able to have a theory of this because we don't understand the link? Okay, but the answer is, don't worry, because machine learning. Machine learning works without understanding what it's doing either. Okay, so that's a very deep point. Okay, that. In machine learning, you're translating from English to French, you're doing all kinds of stuff. And of course, the algorithm, so it may have got lots of data about English and French sentences, but not that much other information. Okay, so in the same way as machine learning somehow maps, very complicated things to very complicated things without understanding what it's doing, that's exactly analogous to Darwin's theory of evolution. Because so Darwin's theory of evolution, survival of the survival of the fittest or natural selection. What's remarkable is that the theory doesn't mention physics, biology, ecology. So the strategy doesn't depend on any knowledge of the world. It's a very generic algorithmic recommendation. And that's exactly what machine learning algorithms are. So Darwinian evolution is obviously an early machine learning algorithm. Okay. So that's basically what I have to say. So since I promised to say this, should we be worried about super intelligent robots? I think the argument usually centers on the notion that intelligence is some linear thing, and we can get more and more intelligent, and once we get you extrapolate, and cell phones will be more intelligent than us in 5 years' time, and they'll be selfish, hostile, and treat us badly. So the question is this something we should be worried about? So my main reason I'm not so worried about this is that so with learning and evolution, I think they're very neat theories, and we will find out how everything really works. We'll find out how we learn. We'll find out how we evolve. Everything we'll sort it out. But intelligence is a very different kind of word. So I don't think for intelligence there's any kind of course. We don't have any kind of. There's no hope for such a theory. Of course, many people talk about multiple intelligences. So intelligence isn't kind of a linear race. So there's no unitary notion of intelligence. So there's no inevitable avenue for such arbitrary improvement. Also, maybe qualitatively, maybe we're kind of intelligence complete. Maybe what's intelligence? We can memorize stuff. We can simulate algorithms. We can reason according to certain algorithms. So maybe just like in computation, we're not waiting for a super novel kinds of computation. We think that computers are kind of Turing complete. So there's no reason to think that we'll be exceeded by some new kind of intelligence by machines. So we've got no reason to think that it may happen, of course. And the fourth point is that is a bit different. Is that this idea that intelligence is the same as being selfish and survive at all costs. It's a coincidence that humans are like that, I think. Okay. So this very strong survival instinct clearly is the result of biology over billions of years. So what's around is pretty good at survival. But the robots we build, or robots will design, or robots will evolve, we've got no reason to believe that they'll be as bad as us. Okay, so I don't worry about that. Okay, so just the last slide. But nevertheless, the word intelligence is, just because we don't understand it, something worth thinking about. So one quote I like, true genius results in the capacity for evaluation of uncertain, hazardous, and conflicting information. So this seems a pretty good summary of big data, right? That you've got uncertain, hazardous, and conflicting information, and it's very difficult to make decisions and judgments, and we don't have a theory of how it should be done. So certainly extending machine learning to broader capabilities, including reasoning, is something I'm interested in, and I think it's a big topic for the future. And most basically, you need to formalize, what you want to achieve. What is it that impressed Winston Churchill about people who could do this? Okay, thank you. Thank you.